This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
It's going to be another Unorthodox Friday episode. And by that, I mean we're going to talk about 3 separate wrestling shows. It's just that one of them is going to take approximately 30 seconds to review. And because this week is going to be really hectic for me, we'll call it pre-move shenanigan week. I still need to do a handful of things before my move-in day next week, so I'm not going to beat around the bush. Not going to waste any time with the cold open intros. I'm just going to get right into the reviews here. It's the 5 Starr Wrestling Report. The one nobody watches, but I'm still doing this despite the dwindling and stagnant viewership. At this point, I've just kind of accepted fate. The fact that the channel's never going to grow and I'm just going to be forever stuck at 123 subscribers on YouTube. But for those that come back to check out the show every week, I do want to send my appreciation your way. And if you're new to the show, make sure you hit the subscribe button, give the show a like, and come back every Monday and Friday for new shows and new reviews. Now that I've blasted through all that in under 2 minutes, let's get into the recaps. No time to waste. Alright, so this is interesting. The YouTube for this week's WCW Saturday Night is WCW Saturday Night, September 9th, 1989. The missing episode, Rare Footage. Now, was that clickbait? Probably. However, you might recall, I think it was last week, didn't I mention something about there being a major fuck-up in the production truck where they aired the wrong episode of WCW Saturday Night? Was it they aired the same episode twice in back-to-back weeks? I think that was for an August taping, though. Whatever the case happens to be, this is apparently the Lost Episode of WCW on the Superstation. And if there is more to this show than what originally aired in 1989, it was not on the YouTube feed. I swear, half of these reviews are me coming on here and talking about how god-awful and brain-dead these people are when it came to anything production-related. And go figure. Tends to happen when you hire non-wrestling people to run a wrestling program. Great call from Jim Hurd. Let's put regular TBS producers that know nothing about wrestling in charge of running and operating a 2-hour weekly wrestling show in prime time. How could they possibly fuck that up? Well, they did. Airing wrong episodes and losing tapes along the way due to negligence and/or stupidity. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not about to sit here and give you a full in-depth review of everything. I mean, this week it's not even worth it. For 13 minutes and change, or however long the show was, I watched this entire episode while taking a dump on the toilet, and I can pretty much regurgitate everything I saw in the following bullet points. We had some more Clash hype this week with JR and Gordon Soley. There was a midnight squash with 2 of the worst jobbers I've ever seen. Think about the ground that covers. And this wasn't even part of the tape that I initially saw. Somebody else uploaded this in a completely separate video. They also did a Brian Pillman-Eddie Gilbert singles match, which I believe Rhubarb Jones says was a TV main event. But that match didn't even make the original cut. So I actually watched out of my own volition, because it sounded like a great pairing. Sure enough, match was excellent. It was a babyface match, but they definitely got the most out of it, considering Pillman was still very green and coming up through the ranks. But that was the extent of what we had. At least anything publicly available. Now, we will do a full Clash of Champions review next week to kind of make up for the pitiful go-home hype. But since we really don't have much else to cover on the Superstation show, I'll just go ahead and move on with the Midsouth review. And they were really eager to jump into the action cold this week. How's this for a start to Mid-South television? A triple handicap match with Terry Ellis, Rick McCord, and Paul Brown versus Hercules Hernandez. And to sweeten the pot even further, according to Jim Cornette's own lips here, if Hercules can't beat these schmucks in under 10 minutes, Cornette will personally give each of the jobbers $500. And he made no mention about this coming from his mama's bank account, so he must have been talking about his own personal money. So he means business. For the record, Hercules had no issue beating these three up in less than 10 minutes. And I've seen some great classic squashes in my day. This might have legitimately been one of the best one-sided squashes I've ever seen. It was so awesome. The fact that it was never mentioned that it was elimination rules, or that any of the jobbers could randomly get involved without tags. It was basically Pee Wee Anderson's way of saying, fuck it. We all know Hercules is going to kill these guys anyway. You know, come to think of it, I think it actually would have put the job guys at the disadvantage if they had to follow traditional tag rules. So even by putting the match more heavily in their favor, they still got massacred in under 2 minutes. Yeah, Hercules made them all pass out to the Shinanumaki. And that was all mostly a prelude to the main talking point for this week. Pretty classic Mid-South segment here, if I do say. Now, we talked about the contract signing between the Midnight and the Rock and Roll way back when. And at the time, it was a pretty cut and dry contract signing. There weren't any major scuffles or brawls that broke out between the two parties. And I think I may have briefly touched on the fact that there was another contract signing between the Midnights and the Fantastics later in the year that was a lot more notable. Well, here we are. It is this segment. In a way, this is what really helped to facilitate the rivalry and make it a personal issue between both teams. Now, we did get a non-title match between these teams a few weeks ago. Remember, that was when Bobby Eaton was selling the injury of getting run into the ring post by Terry Taylor, so Crusher Khrushchev ended up filling in as Dennis's partner. So technically, we haven't really seen a true Midnights versus Fantastics match or segment up until this point. But we've also seen how quickly the Fantastics have become fan favorites in the Mid-South area. Just like how Ricky and Robert were the popular babyface duo when they first arrived. And before we break down the big angle that took place here, we had Grizzly Smith going over some stipulations in the contract. The first stip is that both teams requested no disqualification. But there is a catch in the clause. It's no disqualification, but because it's a Midsouth sanctioned title match, the banning of chairs, 2x4s, dog collar chains, and tennis rackets is still being enforced. Which is, albeit kind of strange. So, technically it is not a no DQ match. And or, according to the Midsouth rulebook, it is not okay to use a chair, 2x4, tennis racket, or chain. But it is perfectly okay to use, say, a gun, perhaps a knife. So you're saying Jim Cornette could hypothetically pull out a pistol mid-match, shoot Bobby Fulton and or Tommy Rogers point blank and kill them. That will not be grounds for a disqualification. But by God, if he gets in that ring and whacks one of them with a gimmick tennis racket, that's a bridge too far. We can't have that. I'm just trying to get my bearings straight here. I am not insinuating anything about how stupid this role is, even though it is quite incredibly stupid. Now, the second clause in the contract is there are no substitutions allowed. So if a member of either team goes down with an injury or something, they cannot find a replacement partner. In fact, they'll wind up forfeiting the match. They won't even be permitted to work in a handicap situation. Put an asterisk next to that. And finally, the third clause in the supposed contract agreement. I don't think there was one. Even though JR specifically noted that there are 3 clauses to go over, we only heard 2. No DQ and no subs. What's the third clause that I missed? Did I have a stroke? Or did they just completely ignore the third clause? Well, in any case. Oh, Jim was great, by the way. Being a little toady trying to suck up to Grizzly Smith. Like, basically, he'd keep trying to point the finger and talk about how everything in the contract goes toward the Fantastics as well. As if Bobby and Tommy were actively looking for reasons to cheat and use gimmicks to their advantage. The most white meat goody two-shoe babyfaces on the roster. Yeah, we need to watch out for them. They're up to no good. But then we get the real meat of the segment. After both parties sign the deal and get the match officially sanctioned, those gullible babyfaces, boy, did they fuck up big time here. Cornette goes, "Now I just want to make sure I have my bearings right. None of these clauses are irreversible now, correct? The contract is signed. It's official. There's no going back, right, Grizzly?" Grizzly goes, "That is correct." To which Jim responds with, "Good. That's all I need to know." And of course, if you're actively watching the Midnights the entire time, you see Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey huddling together and clearly planning some kind of sneak attack. Sure enough, it's exactly what happens. Dennis throws the powder in Bobby Fulton's eyes. Tommy Rogers tries to immediately go after Dennis, but you have Bobby Eaton waiting behind him with a chair. And let me tell you something. Beautiful Bobby was one of the safest workers in the business. That fucking chair shot he gave to both members of the Fantastics, he did not hold back. He brutalized Tommy and Bobby with those fucking chair shots. Oh my God. When he made contact with Tommy's head, it sounded like a gunshot went off in the room. Just pow! Creamed him right over the fucking skull. Of course, he did the same to Fulton. I don't even remember at this point, but I'm pretty sure Jim's relayed the story. The Fantastics actually wanted Bobby to lay in with a chair shot. And knowing that Bobby wasn't going to legitimately try to maim them here, he was able to believably work a chair shot while making it look like he damn near killed the guys. It was disgusting. And of course, to make the whole scene even better, you have the Fantastics out there in their white tuxedos. They come up bleeding buckets all over their custom tuxes. And the women in the crowd are legitimately crying and shrieking like they just witnessed their husbands getting assassinated in broad daylight. I mean, it was pretty grim, especially for that time period. We've seen some rather heavy angles take place throughout the territories, but yeah, they really cranked up the heat in this feud by doing what they did here. And Watts explained it all perfectly when they came back from commercial. The Midnights knew what the stipulations were. They understood everything that was written into that contract. And they deliberately planned this attack to try to get the match thrown out by injuring the Fantastics and putting them out of action for good. So Grizzly Smith is going to fly to Tampa tomorrow and meet with the Midsouth Board of Directors to get some clarification on how this match is going to play out. It was great stuff. What can I say? Brilliant heat angle. Exceptional work between the Midnights and the Fantastics here. You know, again, there's a reason a lot of experts talk about this. It was that good. And it holds up all these years later. And so after they wrapped up everything there, we got some footage from the Myriad Center in Oklahoma. The match is Dr. Death Steve Williams versus Chris Adams. And despite Williams being a heel here, he was still getting massive babyface pops from the crowd, just for being the home state boy. And let me say, Dr. Death was not the most blazing personality, especially when it came to promos. But he really came out of his shell here by playing up the heel antics. He was great in this match. Like him overselling the slap that Adams gave him. Bitching to the ref about it when Dr. Death literally slapped Adams no less than a minute prior to that. Pro wrestling ain't rocket science, man. You do not need to do all the flips and acrobatics just to get people to react to stuff. Oh, maybe nowadays you do. But back then it was so much simpler. So Dr. Death worked over Adams for a lot of the match. He ended up missing a big diving splash, which turned things back in Chris's favor for a bit. They did kind of fuck up the super kick spot, which was a pivotal turning point in the match. I think Adams was trying to hit Williams in the jaw, but he ended up kind of sticking his chest out too far, so most of the impact made contact with Dr. Death's chest. But it did set up the heat finish where Williams double-legged Adams in the corner and used the ropes for leverage to steal the pin. I wouldn't necessarily call it a great match or anything, but I mean, you definitely see the improvement building with Dr. Death every week. He's so much more confident in the ring than he was probably even 6 months ago at this point. I always coined Dr. Death as one of those truly undervalued, most improved types of talents. Someone that started from scratch, raw and green as goose shit. Wasn't necessarily a natural when it came to the in-ring work, but he stuck with it, worked hard, got a lot better over time, and he wound up becoming a pretty damn good talent by 85, 86, would you say? That was probably peak Dr. Death, right? 85 to 87, somewhere in that window. And the reason I say undervalued is because you don't really hear a lot of people talk about Dr. Death in his early years. Like when he just first started in 1982. Because he was horrible when he first broke in. And I don't even mean that in a slanderous way. I'm just calling a spade a spade. He was not good for his first year or so in the business. But he kept improving, kept getting better over time as he gained more exposure and started to kind of learn the business more. And the good thing about Dr. Death, too, is that he never came in with the mentality of, I have all this shit figured out. I mean, that's what sets back so many people that try to get into wrestling today. The guys and girls that come in thinking that they understand the business when they really don't know jack shit. Because their only frame of reference to anything they've ever watched is anything between the years 1998 and 2025. And or strictly WWF, WWE content. I mean, they never watched or studied territory tapes. They've never read books or talked to any older school minds that learned from a whole different generation or crop of talent. And that's why the business is in the shape it's in today. It's no longer about the art of what made pro wrestling cool. Now it's all about theatrics, overproduction, and moments. I've grown to hate that word. I mean, you often hear people say, WWE is about creating moments. And they're absolutely right. WWE is 100% in the reactionary business now. I've said that a million times on this channel. Modern WWE is a reactionary product. They're about creating moments for highlight reels and video packages. It's not about the whole package anymore. It's about splicing pockets of matches to show fan reactions to stupid stunts just to get themselves a way to market to advertisers. And that's why everything about modern WWE sucks. And it's why I don't really watch or follow the product right now. For reasons like that. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse. I know I like to go on tangents and talk about how boring and watered down modern wrestling is. You know, I honestly would rather talk about anything else instead of having to review Sonny King and Brickhouse Brown versus Hans Schroeder and Bob Owen. Or, I'm sorry, Big Bob Owen. Indeed. He was certainly big. Perhaps rotund would be a more apropos description. Is it Bob Owen or Bob Owens? Because I wrote Owens down here too. Is he related to Kevin Owens? They have the same build. To be honest with you, the match was perfectly fine when Brickhouse was in there. The minute Sonny King tagged in, looked like a monkey trying to fuck a football. There was an incredibly iconic moment in this match that I watched back on replay like 17 times. I could not stop laughing for the life of me. I was in tears. Fucking Bob Owens, dude. Okay, Brickhouse goes to shoot him off, and immediately after shooting him into the ropes, he tags Sonny. There is like one other time I've ever seen this spot in wrestling, and it happened about 20 years later in TNA during the infamous barbed wire Christmas tree debacle, where somebody got Irish whipped toward the barbed wire tree, and for the very first time in history, somebody finally thought to themselves, I'll just stop running to avoid making contact with the barbed wire tree. Bob Owens hits the ropes on one side, and he starts running back from the other side. He runs past Brickhouse Brown. He sees that he's running toward the other side and that there's nobody there to do anything to him. So thinking on his feet, Owen says to himself, shit, there's nobody there for me to feed for. I'll just stop running. Genius. Now, in all fairness, this was kind of Brickhouse's fault. If he was going to tag in Sonny for him to take over, he should have tagged him before shooting off Owens into the ropes. Not after the fact. I mean, at that point, you basically left Owens to twist in the wind, because he legitimately did not have anybody to feed for. So as funny as it was to make fun of Owens for that spot because he looked like such a douchebag, it was kind of on Brickhouse Brown. Hilarious shit, though. I could not stop laughing. It was made even better with Bill Watts' comment. This is a direct quote. Well, that was unusual there. So they did some more spots for a minute. Brickhouse ended up throwing a series of like 3 or 4 drop kicks and wound up pinning Owens after the 4th one. Probably just told him, stay down, we're going home. Comically terrible match. So bad it was funny. It was not quite as funny as the next in-ring segment with Buddy Landel and Butch Reed trying to show up Brickhouse in a workout session. This is just classic pro wrestling, man. The fucking idiot heels making asses of themselves at the expense of the babyface. And best of all, the babyface doesn't have to do a thing. He just lets the heels look like jagoffs and humiliate themselves. Now again, you have to recall the storyline. Brickhouse Brown showed up and beat Buddy Landel twice in one segment. Then he came out the following week and made Landel and Ernie Ladd look stupid. So now you got Butch Reed out there cutting heel promos about being the toughest, baddest athlete in Midsouth. He's trying to flex his muscles and be this obnoxious dirtbag. Which is easily the best version of Butch Reed, no question. So they're calling Brickhouse down to try to get the better of him. First, Butch makes the challenge for an arm wrestling contest, which Landel actually talks him out of, because he knows that Reed could easily beat Brickhouse Brown. So Landel wants to offer to take his place. Unsurprisingly, Brickhouse beat him. And then right as Reed tries to blindside Brickhouse, here comes Sonny King to cut him off and press slam him off the top rope. And again, it's just great stuff, man. The heels trying to lull the babyfaces in only to get outsmarted. Their genius ploy backfired on them. It's the kind of thing you love to see as a wrestling fan. I can even overlook Sonny being involved. At least his interaction was kept to a bare minimum. But we ain't done yet. A little more to go over here. We had Adrian Street beating Robert Christie in a rather entertaining squash. The fans were chanting something at Adrian during the intros here, but I couldn't make out the dialect. Sounded quite derogatory. Whatever it was. I guess the Midsouth fans weren't too keen on the gayness of Adrian's gimmick. Funny thing about it is that he still looked less ridiculous than Robert Christie, who basically just looked like an over-bloated Luigi. It's, I think that's a video game character, right? Luigi? The green Italian guy with a mustache? I'm not a true gamer, so pardon me for not knowing the classics. Adrian won with a bridging suplex in about 90 seconds. Not really much else to say about it. Nor was there really much to say about the main event of Ernie Ladd and Crusher Khrushchev versus Terry Taylor and Johnny Mantell. Seriously though, I was not kidding about Khrushchev. He literally is just there to team up with random heels every week. Not that I have a problem with that, it's just funny to me. I mean, for 5 minutes, the action was solid enough. Mantell was kind of fucking up stuff in the early goings. I don't know what the hell he was trying to do with Khrushchev, but he kept going for all these moves where he would jump up to try to grapple Khrushchev to the mat. Just looked sloppy and out of control. But once they settled things down for a bit, match was okay. Some good double team spots with the baby faces. Wound up with Khrushchev getting taken down with a Russian leg sweep. Then as Ernie went to try to break up the count, Taylor moved out of the way so Ernie would end up hitting Khrushchev by mistake. And I wrote here, Mantell jackknife cradles Khrushchev for the 3. I believe there was some other stuff prior to that, but apparently I was not paying close enough attention because I did not write anything down. I still would like to know where the hell Magnum TA is. Is he alive? Christ. I don't even remember the last time we saw that guy on television. And I believe he is still the North American champion. Who the hell was out here a few weeks ago calling him a paper champion? They might have been Buddy Landell. So far, he's been proven right. You'd have a hard time remembering Magnum was the champion if you weren't paying close enough attention. He's getting that Brock Lesnar 2020 preferential treatment. Work a date every 6 to 9 months and still make twice as much money as more than 80% of the roster. Obviously, they're putting a lot of focus on the Midnight's Fantastics program, so I can see them trying to prioritize that at the moment. Second to that, I guess, would be Brickhouse Brown and Buddy Landell, with Hacksaw Reed and Sonny King being heavily involved in the background. You know, I will say, there's definitely been an improvement with the quality of the show in the last few weeks. The summer lull seems to be taking a back seat. You can tell they're still trying to move past the whole JYD situation. And I'm not going to beat a dead horse by going over all that again. But the show did seem to take a turn in the right direction with moving out forward and trying to course correct a little bit. So I will call that steps in the right direction. To quote one of my music colleagues. Wish I could call World Class's product steps in the right direction. They're more like climbing up a downhill escalator. They're still moving in a direction. It's just not necessarily the most productive method. Now, I ended up watching the show really late on Sunday night, after I got back from Detroit and actually had a little bit of downtime around like 7:30. I'll admit, it was kind of difficult for me to get into the show, mostly because I was so damn tired from all the travel. The other problem was that the show was insanely boring. I was really hoping we would get some of the recent Star Wars matches aired on tape delay. And they've been hyping this tag team tournament for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Based on everything we saw this week, you'd have thought they never even mentioned anything about a tag team tournament. There was barely even a mention of the titles this week. I'd also be remiss if I didn't point out the empty bleachers at the Sportatorium. Not that it already hasn't been an ongoing issue, but man oh man, those seats are becoming more and more visible to the naked eye as the months go by. Like at first it used to just be during the prelim bouts where you would see a decent amount of empty seats in the room. Then they would kind of fill up as the show went along. It is now prevalent throughout the entire program. And you know what? How can you blame most people for not wanting to come see the show in person? What the fuck are you going to get invested in? I mean, no offense to Bruiser Brody and Buzz Sawyer, but it's not really a television main event that's going to attract a full house. Despite how over Brody was in the Dallas market. They sure weren't lining up at the door to see Joe LeDuc versus Mark Youngblood. I mean, as entertaining as LeDuc was in that promo a few weeks ago, this was, not the prettiest thing to watch from an entertainment value standpoint. While it is funny to hear Bill Mercer mention the fact that LeDuc at one point pulled a freight train down the tracks with his bare teeth, kayfabe or not, doesn't really hide the fact that the match here was incredibly lame and dull. Frankly, I'd rather seen footage of LeDuc pulling trains with his teeth. That would have been awesome. Poor Percy's out there as a one-man working crew trying to bring some form of life and crowd energy to this thing. And then there's Mark Youngblood, who's got the personality of rotting tree bark. So nobody's reacting to anything he does offensively. It ends up with Youngblood trying to fire up a little bit on LeDuc. And, I mean, the crowd did temporarily get up for a minute for that, but you know, right as Youngblood went to charge LeDuc in the corner, he gets caught with a standard backbreaker and pinned. And when I say standard backbreaker, I literally mean LeDuc caught Youngblood in his arms. He very nonchalantly draped him across his knee. And he pinned him. Totally took the air out of the room. It's like everybody collectively went, yeah! It's like when you're ready to climax from a good BJ and you can't seal the deal at the last minute. Not to use a crude analogy. I couldn't think of anything else on the fly. Sue me. Then we came back for a promo with Percy at ringside. And he is now alongside Buzz Sawyer and Matt Bourne, the current reigning World Tag Team Champions of World Class. So I guess they won the tournament. Not that we would know that offhand, because it was never really mentioned in any capacity here. We just see Bourne and Sawyer with the belts on camera, and that was the extent of the explanation we were given. Here's what we do know when it comes to the Pringle dynasty. Percy's relationship with Rick Rude is now over. He is officially gone from the Dallas area. He lost his rematch to Chris Adams for the world title. And now he's off to greener pastures. And Percy is now disbanding the Pringle dynasty altogether. And he's moving on to form an alliance with a new crop of talent. Specifically Matt Bourne and Buzz Sawyer. There was a great moment during this interview where Sawyer just casually blurts out, "Learn to live with it." Very matter of fact, Bill Mercer just looks him dead in the eye and goes, "What?" And then Sawyer repeated the exact same thing louder and right in front of Mercer's face. I think Mercer legitimately had no idea what Sawyer initially said, which is what made that part funny. Okay, but the only thing that didn't make sense to me here, Percy originally said that the Pringle dynasty is no more. He's moving on from all that now that Rick Rude is gone from the territory. But in the same breath, he's talking about how the Pringle dynasty is going to continue to run roughshod over the Dallas area. So, is the faction dead or alive? Why not just rename it the Pringle Dynasty 2.0? Not to say that Bourne and Sawyer won't be great additions to Percy's group. Hell, at this point, anything involving Percy on television is a good thing. I mean, there really wasn't much of an explanation for how these guys came together. The reasoning was something to the effect of, Bill Mercer, you know what's been going on. The people know what's been going on. Actually, no. Nope, as a matter of fact, I have no idea what's been going on. And I review the show every week. And Percy's been managing practically every heel on the active roster for the last 2 months. It wasn't that long ago he was out there in the Dingo Warriors corner for no apparent reason. And the following week he was back with Rick Rude because somebody fucked up in the taping schedule. But he says he's got managers' contracts for Sawyer and Bourne. Hey, why not? They're champions now, and Percy likes to manage guys with belts. Maybe it'll be explained further in due time. So then we had the Dingo Warrior versus Brian Adias. Also had David Manning on commentary to call the action with Mercer. You know, offhand, I can't remember if we've ever had David Manning do color commentary. He was pretty good. Hell, he was better than Mark Lawrence. I'm surprised they didn't try to make Manning a regular once he stopped officiating full-time. Now, it was mentioned at one point in this match, and I don't know whether this is a cover story to explain all the empty seats in the building or if this is actually legit. Apparently, the reason the Sportatorium was so empty this week was due to high water in the surrounding areas. So apparently people had issues getting to the building. I'm not saying that was a direct lie, but it seemed oddly suspicious to me. Not that people couldn't get to the building because of the bad road conditions, but the idea that people were being turned away at the door due to flooding. If people were traveling to see the show, there's no way they were going to get turned away at the doors, having already arrived. Where the fuck were they going to go? If the weather was that atrocious, they're already there. Just let them in the goddamn building. Are they afraid that a tsunami is going to come barreling through the doors? I mean, I'm not saying people should have been kicking down doors just to watch the Dingo Warrior in action. I mean, the match he had with Adias here was fine. Can't really call it much beyond fine. Warrior definitely sold a bit more than what we were used to seeing. And he actually ended up losing by countout when he dumped Adias over the top rope at the end. Or did I say countout? I meant disqualification. Yeah, he's most definitely back to being a heel. Despite that match he had with Rick Rude a couple weeks back when the people were soundly cheering him and getting behind him. Now he's just back to being a bad guy again. I still want to see that tag match from the Star Wars event where he apparently teamed up with somebody named Socko. Made a gag about him teaming with Mick Foley's gimmick sock puppet a few weeks ago. I still have not found any information about a wrestler named Socko. But they were talking about him here. So, if that match exists somewhere on the internet, I would love to see it. I need to be proven that Socko is an actual wrestler. I mean, he definitely didn't draw money like Foley's sock puppet did back in the day. You know what else didn't draw? The match I'm about to talk about with Mike von Erich and the Grappler. Oh boy. I think it was last week, right? I made a comment about how we haven't seen Mike appear on the show in a very long time. Despite all that hype that went into his big return earlier in the summer. Well, he is back. Can't really say he's better than ever because that would be a bold-faced lie. Yes, he was over with the Dallas crowd. They were elated to see him back in the ring, which you would absolutely expect. I mean, he's been through hell and back in the last year. You know, seeing him in a wrestling ring again, there was a genuine excitement in the air about it. And, like, Mike wasn't horrible in this match, but I mean, the Mike von Erich story is always a difficult subject to bring up without getting overly cynical and dark. Even here, you could tell that his confidence level was weak. Personally, I've always thought Mike worked a lot better in tag team settings, especially when he had Kevin or Kerry to feed off of. By himself, he just never really learned how to pace himself or capture the people's attention. And while his basics were okay here, I mean, even David Manning had brought up how rusty Mike was in his recent showings. So he apparently has been working house show matches. Just nothing for the live syndicated shows until this week. Understandably. Like I said, he was passable here. Nothing looked incredibly off or mistimed, but I mean, it just goes back to the conversation of Mike just never really getting the wrestling business. He never carried himself in the same way his brothers did. And he knew that. Like, he could do the moves, but the personality was never there. He and the Grappler did some stuff together, and the people were satisfied with the result because Mike went over. And it was the right booking call, having him win clean with the sunset roll-up. But it just never clicked watching from home. And like, I don't want to get too stuck in the weeds by going over the timeline of Mike in the next 6 to 7 months. But there's a reason you've heard a lot of talking heads bring up how Mike never should have gotten back in the ring post-illness. When David mentioned how he at one point had gotten down to like 150 pounds or whatever it was. Now granted, he looked a lot healthier in terms of size and stature, but he was still incredibly skinny. And we know for a fact that Mike was not taking care of himself when it came to his health. I often think about guys who go through brain trauma or severe head injuries at various stages of their careers. The guys that try to get back in the ring after all these concussions, and they're never truly the same, despite how they might look on TV. And when you think about Mike after the brain damage he suffered from the toxic shock syndrome, like all the stories you were hearing about him lashing out and having these post-traumatic concussion-like mental breakdowns, there's no way you can objectively look at Mike during this period and not be sad. The bumps he was taking, the blows to the head, the whole thing is really hard to watch. You want to support the guy, you want to cheer for him, but knowing what happens in hindsight, it's incredibly difficult. But I'll go ahead and move past that here. Talk about Bruiser Brody and Buzz Sawyer in the advertised TV main event. With a jump start before the bell. And I do have to admit here, there is something aesthetically pleasing about two wild, crazy dudes just pounding and beating the piss out of each other. I actually wrote here, why haven't we seen Brody and Sawyer interact on TV prior to this? These two were great together. Fuck, I'd have rather seen 57 Brody Sawyer brawls as opposed to 57 Broder Abdullah the Butcher brawls. At least him and Sawyer didn't look like everything was happening in quicksand. Actually, was exciting. It was about 45% chops, 45% biting, and 10% big men brawl spots. I know that might all seem lame on the surface. It's kind of like watching a handsome Jimmy Valiant match in Crockett Promotions circa 1986. Very much an acquired taste. Sawyer actually controlled the majority of the action right before the finishing sequence, which is kind of a clear indicator that Sawyer wasn't going over. Like anytime Brody would start to muster up some offense on him, Sawyer would cut him off and find a way to wrestle him to the mat and take control again. Or he'd just bite him. That worked too. And it led to the spot where Percy tried to throw Sawyer his chain, but as Rick Hazard went to get Percy off the ring apron, Brody cut off Sawyer and basically gave him an uppercut to the jaw while holding the chain. And it was enough to knock him out. It was a cool spot, if you neglect the fact that Hazard could clearly see the chain hanging over the middle rope after Brody used it. But blind referees, it's kind of a staple in wrestling. We'll go ahead and ignore the fact that one half of the current reigning tag team champions just did a job clean after winning the belts not less than 2 weeks prior. At least he was losing to Brody and not, say, Brian Diaz, or somebody lower on the totem pole that doesn't really matter. All in all, the show wasn't a complete and utter disaster. Just, by and large, not a very compelling wrestling program. We'll take David's word that the bad weather explained all the empty seats. Had nothing to do with the quality of the wrestling program. It was nice having a color commentator for a change. Like I said, David Manning was really solid, man. very charismatic talker, super deliberate. Not really flashy in terms of his delivery, but I thought he and Mercer worked very well as a babyface commentary team. Call them the straight shooters. You know, we're still about a month out from the Cotton Bowl. Still don't know what the status of the world title situation is. Effectively, Chris Adams is no longer the world champion, but I don't think they've actually recognized that yet. It also doesn't explain who they're setting up as his probable challenger for the Cotton Bowl. Who knows if they have anything involving the title period booked. You know, right now the only new development is Percy aligning himself with the tag team champions. And Rick Rude is now gone. I think I'm now seeing why the attendance figures were massively down for this year's Cotton Bowl. They don't got shit. It's an abysmal card. They haven't even announced anything yet. Anywho, it's going to wrap it up there. So, we will be back this coming Monday, and hopefully I'll still be in all in one piece. It's going to be a hectic weekend for me, but I'll try to fit in the wrestling, because that's what I do. Manage to find a way. But folks, thanks so much for checking out the show, and again, make sure you come back to check us out every Monday and Friday for new shows and new wrestling podcasts, YouTube and Rumble. Take care, all. Peace out.